All right. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us. I am Selena King with Midwest Dairy, the wellness manager for Illinois. And so today we're going to be talking to Katie from Northwestern, their sports nutrition director of performance, a little bit about how to help you guys help your athletes become the best nutritional athletes that they can be. And so we have a lot of great information to share with you today. So we're excited to have you. I'm going to let Jeff introduce himself, and then I'm going to go to Katie first. So again, while we're waiting and while we're getting started, you can definitely chat throughout this whole session, and we'll keep those questions coming to Katie so she can answer them as they go. So go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Selena. My name is Jeff Ziegenhorn. I am the general manager for the Illinois High School Association. I technically work for Teal Properties Group. We are a marketing agency that's helping the IHSA out with its partnerships. This being one of them that I'm working on. We're happy to have you guys here. We know you're under a lot of time constraints and so forth, so we're glad that you could make it. And we hope that this adds value to what you're doing during the season. Again, we know you're very busy, and Katie's going to have some great tips to help keep your athletes working to their highest potential. So thank you for joining. I'll kick it back to Selena. But if you guys have any questions, please let us know. And we're also going to be passing out some more information in this area after this as well. So thank you guys for joining.
All right. Thanks, Jeff, so much. All right, Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you. It's your show. Again, people, we can ask questions throughout the thing. You can chat them in, and I'll ask Katie, and we can keep it moving, and we definitely answer questions at the end. So let's get started.
All right. Thank you so much, Selena. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate the invite today. Very excited to be here to talk with coaches that are so influential in the lives of high school athletes. As a former high school athlete myself, I know that those were such important years in my life and forming kind of who I am as a person. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work that you all are doing. I know that it's a long hours and sometimes thankless, and I hope that I can be helpful as a sports dietitian. So a little bit of background on me. I've been a sports dietitian working with the Northwestern University athletes for a little over 8 years now. And before that, I was at Daytona State College in Daytona Beach, Florida. So been a sports dietitian for a little over a decade right now. Absolutely love the work that I do. I'm hopeful that I can use some of the wisdom that I've gained in helping athletes kind of use their nutrition to fuel their health and performance, and pass that along to you guys so that you can kind of even make this information more impactful and kind of touch more lives. So as Selena said, we will be monitoring the chat. This doesn't have to be a super formal presentation, so please feel free to chime in at any time. We can stop, we can pause, we can pivot. Thank you for those of you who've introduced yourself. We have so many coaches from a variety of different sports. And so I think this is going to be a really fun group to chat with today. All right, so I will move on and kind of let you know where we're headed. Like I said, you all are really key nutrition influencers in the lives of high school athletes. So I would love next if you would open up the chat box and tell me kind of what are some of the challenges, the nutrition challenges that you face in your position with your athletes. What are some of the things that your athletes are struggling with? What are some of the things that you're struggling to help your athletes with? I'll give you just a minute to kind of fill in some of that information too, so we can guide our discussion that way. All right, we have a comment coming in about hydration is a challenge, but I would imagine making sure that they're getting enough water just during the day and during practice, trying to find healthy snacks, trying to figure out what to eat at school, what to eat at home is another one, trying to fuel before practice. The timing of all of this stuff is really challenging, especially maybe with all the other things that the student athletes have going on. Yes, for sure. Eating disorders. Yes. And sports. Some sports are even higher risk than others, and you may work with some of those sports. So we can have a few points for kind of navigating that as well. These are all really great. And I hope I've designed some content today. I believe that we're going to hit on most of these. So feel free to continue to use that chat box as questions come up. So where we're headed today is we're going to speak about facing some of these fueling challenges that you all have mentioned in the chat. I think our first step is to find out why this challenge is going on from the individual student athletes, and then kind of understand what the barriers are and how we can intervene depending on the specific barrier. So we're going to walk through that. Then we are going to talk about managing nutrition noise. A lot of times athletes have a lot of nutrition information coming at them from social media or from parents or from, anywhere. And it can be hard to figure out what exactly to do. How do we simplify this down? So we'll talk about that. And then we'll also talk about dietary supplements and kind of how to navigate those as a high school athlete and a high school sport coach. So number one, with all these challenges that you are facing, try to find out why. In as non-judgmental way as possible. If we can just be curious with our athletes. I noticed that you are appearing a little bit fatigued in our 6 a.m. practices. I'm wondering if you've had anything for breakfast. Oh, you haven't? Why might that be? And so getting to that why, to have them say, oh, it's a time issue, or, oh, I didn't realize, I didn't know that was important, then that would be a knowledge issue. Or I didn't have any money and there was no food in the refrigerator. That's a resource barrier. So figuring out the why behind some of these things is going to be really important. And instead of just kind of coming in with, I know we all get so busy sometimes and we're just like, oh, you should not be eating a hamburger. You should be eating a turkey sandwich instead. I think there's more value in saying, I noticed that you chose a hamburger as your pregame meal. Could you talk to me about why that was your choice? Then they might say, well, I thought it was tasty and that's all that matters. And so now we have a knowledge barrier again. And so we can do some things around knowledge. And so we're going to talk around a lot of key talking points in terms of meals and snacks and things like that today, but I cannot overemphasize that it is so important to figure out why our student athletes are making these nutrition choices in a very non-judgmental way so that they feel open with us. And then from there, we're able to kind of more accurately kind of guide them with whatever they need in order to overcome that barrier they're facing. So I made a little chart. This is probably a good time for you all to know that you're going to be getting the slides. So you don't have to write notes furiously. You're going to be getting the slides, and you're also going to be getting some special handouts that I created that kind of complement this material and address some of those common challenges that you all have brought up. So I think the handouts will be really valuable. You can use them with your student athletes. Okay. So common barriers, like I said, if you discover it's a knowledge barrier, they just didn't know any better. Okay, then we can provide some education and some talking points. And I'm going to go through a ton of talking points that you can use with your athletes around meals and snacks. Okay, maybe it's a time barrier. They didn't have enough time between classes, or they didn't have enough time between practice or between class and practice or something else. So if it's a time barrier, then we can kind of start to expose them to fast and easy fueling options, the benefits of planning ahead to keep specific things in their lockers. And I'll review all that information with you as well. Maybe it's a resource barrier. It might be really beneficial for you all to figure out how your school, if you don't know already, screens for food insecurity and how that's identified to make sure that, students as a whole and your student athletes are kind of being caught so that they can be directed to resources that are really going to benefit them if they are food insecure. So I'll talk to you about some questions that we use to screen. I don't know that this is necessarily your responsibility, but I think it would be in a good faith for you to kind of find out and make sure that this is being done at some level in your institution. Maybe it's an environmental barrier, like they don't have, food accessible in their locker. So their environment isn't set up to help them succeed. They don't have a water bottle next to their bed at night, so they don't even have the opportunity to drink 8 ounces before they put their feet on the floor in the morning. So there's things that we can do to adjust environment, and we'll talk about that as well. And then also appetite can sometimes be a barrier. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the physiology behind why athletes' appetite can be impacted, and we can let them know that this is a normal part of being an athlete, especially if we exercise intensely, but what we can do to to navigate, appetite concerns. Because if you're a high level athlete, it's not always okay to say, well, I'm not hungry, so I'm just not going to fuel. So we'll get to kind of all of those, but yeah, once you figure out the why, you're well on your way to coming up with a valuable intervention. Okay, so let's kind of start with some of the knowledge barriers. A lot of times in high school, there are definitely knowledge barriers because there isn't a sports nutrition class, or maybe they haven't been exposed to a great speaker or any great resources. So I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially in high school, that they probably just don't know any better. And once they know better, then they can hopefully do better. So let's talk about meals. We like to use the concept of winning plates with our athletes. This is a really simple tool to help athletes build plates that are representative of the exercise or the training that they're doing. The plate model is also used at the Olympic Training Center. So if you need to make it seem a little more exciting for your athletes, this is actually how young athletes, when they go to the Olympic Training Center as teenagers, are taught how to eat. So it's the same system, okay? So basically you can see the winning plates over there on the side. Some people call them performance plates or athlete plates, but you can see a heavy training day. So this would be a day when athletes are training for 2 hours or more fairly intensely. It's not just kind of a walkthrough of plays or, a functional movement type of, rest day or anything like that. This is intense exercise for 2 or more hours. If that's what is happening on their day, they should be putting the meal before that training or competition and the meal after that competition. It should look like this. You can see that half the plate is whole grains. That carbohydrate is so critical for fuel. That's the gas for their gas tank. For high intensity exercise, our body needs carbohydrates. So letting your athletes kind of know that the more you move, the more carbohydrate you need. And this is where some of that noise comes in, because sometimes people might hear like carbs are bad or sugar is bad or all these things. And that is too much of a blanket statement for elite athletes and even high school athletes. If they buy into the carbohydrates are bad and we should limit them, then they're not going to have enough gas for their health and performance. So the lean protein piece for a heavy training day is 1/4 of the plate. You'll notice that as the plates change, the protein kind of stays consistent. Protein is really important for building muscle and for supporting a healthy immune system, but our body can really only process so much protein at a time. So the key with protein is to include it in all the meals and snacks, maybe not the one right before exercise, because you're trying to be, kind of simple with your digestibility there. You don't want to have a big protein shake or anything before exercise. But the key with protein and rebuilding muscle and building muscle is to have moderate amounts of it several times throughout the day versus just having like big bolus doses. So that's the protein piece of the plate. And then the other pieces kind of are the fruits and vegetables. We coach our athletes that, fruits and vegetables, the vitamins and the minerals in those are so important to help, process carbohydrates down to fuel and process fat down to fuel so that they can do their jobs. Vitamins and minerals are really important for immune support, and those are found primarily in fruits and vegetables. So the why behind some of that's really, really kind of important. And then a shout out to healthy fat, whether it be, some olive oil or some, nuts in your trail mix or seeds. That's really important for recovery. So it just plays a role in inflammation and just kind of keeping inflammation kind of controlled. So you can see the heavy training plate on here. You can see the moderate training plate. Most high school athletes are going to need the moderate training plate as their baseline plate every day. So if you want to keep this real simple for your athletes, you could just show them one plate, and that would be the moderate training plate. There is a light day training plate that is half vegetables, 1/4 carbohydrates, and 1/4 protein. That is included in the handout you're going to get. So in some scenarios that may make sense for an athlete on a rest day or an off day, but they should not be eating light training plates on a training day at all. And sometimes that's challenging because athletes are just trying to be healthy. So they have a big old salad for lunch, but that's going to inhibit their ability to run fast or do what they need to do quickly during training. So, let's see, I put some ideas down on the bottom, I mean, breakfast sandwiches on the go. That one's a little fancy, honestly. I mean, they can certainly be fancy, but, microwaving an egg and sticking it between two English muffins as they run out the door could be a very effective breakfast. So can a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So that's great. I put a stir fry in there just because, as you talk with parents, and you may find people who, care about minimizing food waste, stir fry can be a great way to do that, because you can just kind of throw whatever leftovers in a stir fry pan and throw some teriyaki and throw some soy sauce on it, and you have like a lovely meal of leftovers that are kind of turned into something else. So you can see I have a few other food examples on there as well. But if meals tend to be a challenge for your team, maybe introducing them to the winning plates and some examples of how they can create these in their cafeteria. And maybe they could come up with, all right, what would this look like in the cafeteria? And, it's not going to be perfect, it really isn't. But if we can get it 80% of the way there, it's going to really benefit health and performance. So that's our kind of addressing a knowledge barrier around meals. Okay, so now we'll move on to addressing a knowledge barrier around pre-fuel. Some of you mentioned eating before training can be a real challenge. Okay, so if it's a knowledge barrier, if they didn't know that was an important thing to do because no one ever told them, let them know that your pre-fuel is kind of like topping off your gas tank. Can everybody hear me okay, or am I breaking up a little bit?
No, you're fine.
Okay, I thought I noticed a little choppiness in the video, so I thought I'd check. Okay. So yeah, that pre-fuel, getting that pre-fuel and that carbohydrate is really important for topping off their gas tank. Sometimes I ask athletes, if you were going to drive from here to California and you only had half a tank of gas, you wouldn't make it, so it doesn't make logical sense to have glycogen stores or carbohydrate stores in your muscles that are half filled. And a nice way to fill them up is to make sure you have a high carbohydrate pre-fuel before your training and your competition. So the goal is 30 to 60 minutes before training to get 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. So that's a really nice rule of thumb that works for high school athletes. And, kind of what does that look like? Here are some examples of what that could look like. Maybe it looks like a quick, we mentioned peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That works in so many scenarios, or sunflower and jelly sandwich, sunflower butter, if we have any peanut allergies. But, maybe it looks like a granola bar. Maybe it looks like it comes in the form of a sports drink. So lots of opportunities here to get that 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. But sometimes I notice that it's more common for athletes to kind of undershoot it and not get enough carbohydrates. So maybe they'll have like one squeezy applesauce pouch, and that's only 12 grams of carbohydrates. So it's not quite enough. So maybe 2 squeezy applesauce pouches, and then you're good to go for practice. So I would just, kind of take a look at some labels, and maybe if this is an area that we need to kind of address on our teams, just kind of making sure that they're getting enough carbohydrates. In addition to carbohydrates as pre-fuel, hydration is really important. And I have a lovely hydration analogy I'm going to share with you a little bit later, but the rule of thumb is 16 to 20 ounces of fluid. So maybe you have your athletes kind of take a look at their water bottles that they carry with them throughout the day. And, did they, at about an hour before practice was going to start, did they have 16 to 20 ounces of, their water bottle? Maybe their water bottle is only 16 to 20 ounces and it's the whole thing. Maybe they have a larger water bottle and it's half, but try to, if it's a knowledge barrier going on, try to make that kind of as practical as you possibly can, which is, what you all do best. So, sports drinks, we usually get a lot of questions about sports drinks. Are they good? Are they bad? Honestly, it's not that simple. They are really good if they are used for a purpose and for their intention. So their intention is very easily digestible carbohydrates, which can be a really good spot for pre-fuel. So getting, 16-ounce Gatorade before training could be really helpful, or having, a Powerade during, a practice could be really, really helpful in making sure that their energy stores stay high. Having a sports drink, while you're sitting on the couch playing video games at night is not a good time. You don't need easily digestible sugar, carbohydrates for that particular activity. So as a sports dietitian, I'm all for sports drinks when they're used at the appropriate times. They can be a really awesome tool for supporting health and performance. Like I said, another talking point is, quick digesting carbs, low fiber, low protein, low fat. So it is going to look like simple carbohydrates. It's going to look like fruit. It's going to look like simple granola bars. It's not going to be like a fiberful, cereal, or it's not going to be like a bunch of nuts or something like that, because that takes a long time to digest. And that's not the goal of pre-fuel. The goal of pre-fuel is to get it, digested quickly and into your system, not sitting in your gut digesting while you're trying to train and compete. So while the things that I mentioned, the fiber one, bars or the kashi cereals or the things like that might be really healthy for you, pre-fuel is not really the time for high fiber, high fat types of food. This is where we can also start talking about like cheeseburgers before practice. Like I'm all for a cheeseburger every once in a while, but there's so much fat in it that it takes a long time to digest. And the goal of your practice is to divert your blood to your arms and to your legs so that you can run really fast, not to be diverting blood and energy to your stomach so that you can digest a cheeseburger. Okay. So all foods, dietitians say this, all foods fit. And I do believe that all foods fit. It's just for athletes, you really need to think critically about what is my intention for the next thing that I'm going to do? And is my nutrition lining up with that intention? I mentioned already that any fear of sugar will negatively impact high intensity training and competition, because if athletes are purposefully, limiting sugar, especially right before, that's just going to limit the gas in their gas tank. So be careful, watch out for that on your teams in terms of team culture. Somebody mentioned, eating disorders being something that they're really watching out for. And so maybe this is kind of showing up on your teams in terms of fear of sugar and fear of carbohydrates. I think this could be a really great preventative strategy for you as a coach to be pro carbohydrate, especially when you really need it. So that is our knowledge bombs around pre-fuel. Here are some knowledge bombs around refuel. So refuel, we're talking right after activity. There are some key priorities in refuel that you can kind of talk through with your athletes. We need fluid to rehydrate. We need carbohydrates to, again, refill all the glycogen or all the carbohydrate that we just burned out of our muscles. We need protein in order to rebuild and repair our muscles. And we need antioxidants in order to keep the inflammation in our joints controlled. Okay. So those are kind of the key components. A great refuel example is here with a piece of fruit, some milk, maybe a bar in addition to that would kind of accomplish all of those different things. A lot of times what our athletes like to do is a chocolate milk and a cherry juice. Because that gives plenty of fluid, that gives the carbohydrate and the protein from the milk, it gives the antioxidants from the cherry juice. And so that's kind of a lovely kind of combination, super easy. Not everybody has access to cherry juice. That's kind of, sometimes a specialty product. Although it's becoming more popular, sometimes people will buy like the concentrate and kind of, have that in their house so they can have just a little bit of that syrup. But otherwise, like any piece of fruit has antioxidants in it. Any vegetable has antioxidant in it. So kind of making sure that we have those as part of our recovery strategy is going to be important for your athletes. Timing around this is important. We need to consider, are they going for hours after practice before they get dinner? If that's the case, then one of the refuel snacks that I just mentioned is really critical to recovery. If they're going straight from practice or competition to a meal, then they maybe don't necessarily need to do a recovery snack and then also a meal. So got to kind of feel that one out. I know that you all are responsible for planning meals and snacks or places to stop or, that kind of stuff for your athletes. So kind of think about the timing. But if the athlete's going more than 1 to 1.5 hours with nothing after a competition, we definitely need to figure out how to make some snacks available by empowering the athletes to plan ahead and bring these snacks themselves because it's critical for their recovery, or planning a place that they can stop, or maybe mobilizing some of the really passionate parents around nutrition to see if they can support a snack or something after. So we need to also consider, digestibility too. If we think about a long duration activity, if we think about a really long run. I mean, in my experience, this would maybe be like tournaments where you play several games in a day. Sometimes we do have, stomach issues and decreased appetite, which I'll speak on a little bit more. So maybe it would be better to have more simple to digest foods at first, and then kind of build up to that meal that has a little bit more fiber and a little bit more protein and things like that in it.
Hey, Katie, you just gave me an idea. Something too. A lot of schools have worked with like their food service directors to provide snacks before or after a game, or before or after a practice. So that's definitely something that people can take into consideration as well.
That's awesome. It's such a good point. I mean, if there's any way that you can decide once on some of the fueling logistics that you manage for your team, that's always helpful than having to decide something different for every single game. And I know on the road, that's, sometimes inevitable, but maybe you travel with a kit of snacks, or whatever that is kind of the same each time, or maybe that's prepared by your food service provider. They're able to provide you with a snack kit, and you take that on the road, and that, or snack cooler, perhaps, if it has some beverages in it, or maybe they are able to do, full meals for you. I mean, that's just a really nice way to kind of decide once, because fueling logistics is a monster of a job responsibility. I know, because I oversee a staff that does all of that. So thanks for bringing that up, Selena. I will continue, but please make sure that if anything comes up, or you have any questions or any thoughts that come to your mind that you want to share with your colleagues, please feel free to put all of that in the chat so that we can be helping each other along as well. Okay, so let's talk about hydration. Somebody brought this up first, that hydration can be a real issue. Maybe it's knowledge, that our athletes don't know enough about the value of hydration. So the analogy that I like to use around hydration is around a highway system. Okay, so I try to challenge our athletes to think about their bloodstream as a highway. Okay, so the bloodstream needs to carry around all kinds of oxygen and nutrients, and the heart pumps so that oxygen and nutrients can be pushed all over the body in order to make sure that we can think and move and, just function as a human being. When we are fully hydrated, we have a 5-lane highway because we have lots of hydration and blood plasma, and things are able to kind of move around quickly on a 5-lane highway. We can get carbohydrates to our brain so we can think, we can get protein to our muscles so that we can recover, and so on, very quickly, very efficiently. Okay. If we are dehydrated, we are working with a 1-lane highway. Okay. So you can imagine all of the functions that being dehydrated impacts, right? It takes longer for our body to get the fuel that it needs. It takes longer for our body to get the antioxidants that it needs to recover. It takes longer for every process because we're working with a 1-lane highway. So you can see how it leads to difficulty circulating oxygen and nutrients around. It leads to increased heart rate even at rest, because your heart has to work harder to pump those nutrients because it's only working with the 1-lane highway. So because our heart rate is working so hard, even just before we even started, there's a ceiling. So our exercise capacity is limited because we're already working pretty hard and we haven't even started exercising yet. So it can, obviously that leads to decreased performance. It leads to a difficulty distributing heat. So if we're training in a hot environment or competing in a hot environment, our ability to get heat out of our body is a performance advantage. If we can get the heat out better than everyone else and we can keep our core temperature stable, we can keep exercising and training at a higher capacity than somebody who's dehydrated. Also, there's a huge safety component with hydration. And I'm sure your athletic trainers are talking to you about this, but because of this 1-lane highway situation, increased risk of heat cramps, increased risk of heat exhaustion and stroke, and all that stuff is very, very dangerous. Okay. So if there is a knowledge barrier please share these points with your athletes. I put in this interesting study too, that was done on not necessarily on the athlete population specifically, but it showed that mild dehydration actually increases the risk of driving errors. So that's not good either for us as coaches and as adults who don't want to be having driving errors because of dehydration. So, so that's kind of a little bit of the why on hydration. And then I wanted to mention one more thing, and then I see that I have a question in the chat, so I'll get to that one next. So these are some of the key points that we share with our athletes around hydration specifically. We want them to drink 50 to 100 ounces, or sorry, 50 to 100% of their body weight in ounces every day. So if an athlete is 150 pounds, then we would want them to get at least 75 ounces of fluid in a day. Okay. And all fluid counts. Water is awesome, and we should be, primarily getting water, but chocolate milk counts, 100% juice counts, sports drink counts towards this goal. Okay. So we also should be challenging our athletes not to normalize symptoms of dehydration. If they are always thirsty, that's not normal. If their mouth is always dry, not normal. Headaches and muscle cramping and feeling flushed and early fatigue, none of that stuff is normal. So let's help our athletes kind of listen and key into their own bodies, and then honor their bodies by getting a drink of water, and not normalizing dehydration. They should be using the restroom about 6 to 8 times each day. So, you could mention that to your athletes, is if you are adequately hydrating, you should be going to the bathroom every 2 to 3 hours during the day. You should be, if you're adequately hydrated, you can stop drinking about an hour before you go to bed and then get through the night without peeing, because we don't want to be our athletes. We don't want them to be so hydrated that they're waking up in the middle of the night and it's disrupting their sleep. So that's just kind of something to be aware of too. But these are some key points that you can mention to your athletes. Am I adequately hydrated? There's 3 ways that athletes can check. And some of these ways may or may not make sense for your athletes. Check your weight. That might not make sense for the athletes where you're at, or it might make sense because I think I saw a wrestling coach in here, maybe they're checking their weight all the time, daily or whatever. And that's, working for their sport culture. So I think I saw track and cross country, frequently checking weights might be more dangerous than it's worth. So one way is to check your weight before a training session and check your weight after. And if you lose more than 2% of your body weight during exercise, then you are dehydrated. And so for the purposes of wrestling, this can be done in a very controlled and safe way. For everybody else that mentioned their sports, it doesn't make sense to be more than 2% dehydrated. It's not necessary or safe or advantageous. So it doesn't support performance. That's an option. We can make this easier though. We can just, check our urine. Hopefully, every 2 to 3 hours, we have some urine to check, and the goal is kind of pale yellow. We do not need clear urine. That's kind of a sign of overhydration. But pale yellow is kind of the goal. So somewhere in the kind of, 2 to 3 zone on the color chart would be great. And then always monitoring for those symptoms. And if those symptoms arise, just kind of making sure that athletes are kind of honoring their bodies. So with that, I will pause because we do have a question in the chat. It says, for refueling, you mentioned chocolate milk. How many ounces should the athletes take in? And same with the cherry juice. This is an awesome question. So for milk has about 1 gram of protein in an ounce. So our high school athletes, we're probably trying to get 15 to 20, maybe even a little bit more for our larger athletes. So we would be looking at somewhere between 15 and 20 ounces of milk. And so that's definitely more than the little carton. So if you're trying to, get this in little cartons, it's probably going to be, 2 little cartons, not 1 little carton, maybe even 3 for some of our larger athletes that maybe need 25 grams of protein after exercise. In terms of the cherry juice, the standard dose is 8 ounces of the juice. But like I mentioned, there are concentrates where you can just have 1 ounce of the concentrate might be equivalent to the 8 ounces of juice. And so those amounts, see if that makes sense for your athletes. For some of them, it might make sense to get get up to that protein goal with a bar, so you got to kind of play with it and kind of really talk to your athletes and see what would work best for them. Thanks for the question. Okay, so we're going to move past the knowledge barriers, and we're going to start talking about time barriers. So I am sure that you all have heard, I would have eaten, but I didn't have time, in various capacities on your athletes. And I know that kind of, scheduling their lives is part of, the developmental process. And so they're probably going to screw this up a bit. And our college athletes still screwed up, and I still screwed up as an adult sometimes. But as much as we can help them with tools that say, well, just because you may be short on time, it doesn't mean that you just, throw up your hands and you don't fuel at all. Okay. There's some things that we can do proactively to plan ahead. I attached here a meal and shopping plan. And so, this may make sense if you're close with a parent group or things like that, because obviously the parents are controlling the foods that kind of come into the house and they're doing the meal planning. This may make sense if you teach a health class, that the athletes even just go through this, or the students even just go through this exercise, even though they don't buy the foods themselves, like what might it look like for them to plan a breakfast and a lunch and a dinner. A lot of times they're getting some of these meals at school. So maybe you make your own handout in form, and it's only the dinners and some snacks, but planning ahead is really critical to the process. And always just kind of, taking a time to pause and reflect. Okay, I'm so many days or weeks into school. What's going well? What's not going well? Around my fueling, and kind of what can I adjust, and what can I make some small little tweaks in order to fuel myself so that I can perform even better. So here's some easy and fast, ideas. You can pack sandwiches the night before. Peanut butter and banana sandwich I have as an example down there. You could pack a week's worth of trail mix in bags. So people might buy, nuts or seeds or dried fruit, even dark chocolate chips, and you could make a week's worth of trail mix, and then you could have that for a snack between breakfast and lunch if it's an athlete who needs more calories, needs more fuel in order to maintain weight or to put on muscle or things like that. What I mentioned already, kind of homemade breakfast sandwiches or burritos, these can be made in bulk and frozen. We do, the Starbucks does those very fancy egg bites that are so delicious, but also very expensive. So we've started to kind of make those at our house with some of our leftover, chicken or vegetables or beans or whatever it is. We'll put those into muffin tins with eggs and cheese, and then we can cook those. And then they actually freeze up really nice, and you can throw them in the microwave and have your own kind of egg bite at home. So if there's a family that's really into kind of meal prepping in that way, that's an idea. Don't be afraid to eat dinner leftovers for breakfast. I mean, don't let these athletes kind of box themselves in terms of this is a breakfast food, or that's a dinner food, or that's a lunch food. I've heard athletes do that sometimes, and it's just super limiting. We're just trying to do the best we can to fuel our bodies. So as few food rules as we can have around that is the best. Sheet pan meals can be really great for dinner. There's an example down there of just some cut up potatoes and chicken and broccoli, and that can all be kind of thrown in the oven at the same time. I don't have a crock pot, down here, but I do have in those Ziploc bags are all of the ingredients for a crock pot meal kind of all together. So that could be prepped at some point, just thrown in the crock pot the day of, and then you can kind of come home and have that dinner. That's an option. Blending up a quick smoothie, you can make smoothie bowls, and things like those can, have carbohydrates and proteins and nuts and seeds and fruit and all that stuff in it. It can make a meal. It can make a breakfast. It can make a lunch or dinner even. So there's, some easy and fast ideas. I think that, rather than us, always giving the ideas to the athletes, I think it's always powerful for the athletes to give the ideas to us. If we say, all right, here's the challenge, here's the barrier. We're not, sounds like, you're not all eating lunch. Okay. You know, is there anything that makes sense for you to make at home? Like what would be fast, what would be easy, and what would have carbohydrate, protein, and a vegetable in it, and kind of let them kind of come up with their own meal plan themselves. There's always a little bit more buy-in that way. It might not be perfect. It might not be what we would consider like perfectly quote unquote healthy, but even taking a small step in the right direction is something that we should be kind of celebrating in our athletes. So next, I wanted to address a resource barrier. So food insecurity, like I mentioned, you know, I just put a couple of questions in here that, you know, maybe these are included in surveys that your school already puts out, but I just wanted to put some questions in here that kind of have been validated in order to identify food insecurity in a variety of populations. And so I would just stick this in your back pocket because no amount of knowledge, no amount of time, information is going to overcome a food insecurity situation. So we need to make sure that we're identifying these, and we need to make sure that the next slide is just making sure that people who need to be connected with resources are connected with resources. And your school may have even more. This is just a very short list. But you know, keep that in the front of your mind, because I don't want you all to bang your head against a wall. And that this could be an area where you bang your head against the wall. There is some virtual cooking education with Team USA. So you can actually see the Olympians and their dietitians and chefs cooking on this website. So that could be, you know, a fun way to introduce your team to some fast and easy recipes that the Olympians use. And then I have a sheet over on the side for tips for fueling on a budget. So, you know, just resources that you can kind of take with you and use in your situation if it makes sense. Okay, cool. I see another question in the chat. It says, for early morning practices, 6:15 a.m., what time should the athlete consume food and what should they consume? It's a really great question. You know, we are really just looking for some fluid and some really fast digesting carbohydrates in order to get that athlete the gas that they need in order to get through that day. So it could be, you know, 30 minutes before or even less, just depending on how the athlete tolerates having a little bit of food in their stomach. You have to ask them, but I would start, you know, if the athlete is used to having nothing, maybe they have a few sips of sports drink. And that's kind of the first step. You know, it's not 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, but it is fluid and it is some. And then we kind of work our way up from there. You know, maybe from there we work our way up to an adequate amount of sports drink. Maybe if they want to eat, if they feel hungry, maybe then we start to put in a piece of fruit like a banana. That would be awesome. Maybe if they, you know, want a little more than that, maybe we throw in like a granola bar. But again, we want to keep it low in fiber. We want to keep it low in fat. We don't need protein before an early morning workout. So those would kind of be my recommendations around that. Sound good? I think so. Okay. Chime in if you need more clarification or more examples. You bet. Okay. Okay. So there could be some environment or hunger cue barriers. So an athlete may say that they're not hungry, and that is legitimate, but that doesn't necessarily excuse them from fueling their bodies. So exercise physiology considerations, I kind of mentioned, you know, especially after hard, intense exercise, our body has kind of shunted all of our blood and energy and resources towards the working muscles that are demanding it. So our stomach doesn't demand you know, it doesn't demand resources from our body and blood flow and things like that during exercise. So our stomach may be kind of starved of that. It may not have a lot of blood flow. It may not have a lot of nutrients fueling it at that time. And so in that case, we're not going to sense hunger quite as well. Okay. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have anything, but that means we might really need to, you know, start slow, as long as it's not going to make the athlete feel sick, but start slow with some fluid, you know, gosh, at least start with some water. And then see, you know, liquids might be easy. Maybe they can start sipping on that chocolate milk at that point. Just kind of go slow with them. I wrote the gut can and will be trained. So just because they don't feel hungry, you know, before or after exercise now doesn't mean that they can't create that for themselves later. And that would be a beneficial training adaptation for them to be able to tolerate food before, sometimes during, depending on if we have, you know, multiple tournaments going on and all that stuff, you know, being able to tolerate nutrition during can be a performance advantage as well. So another consideration is the environment. Is the environment conducive to the new habit that they're trying to form? So, this goes into a whole slew of habit change content that I could go through. If you're interested in habit change, you might be as coaches. If you haven't looked at Tiny Habits or Atomic Habits or The Power of Habit as books, these could be really great ways for you to kind of think about how human behavior works and how we can instill these habits in ourselves, really, and our athletes. It's about way more than willpower. We cannot just willpower ourselves to new habits. That's not how habit creation happens. And so we need to create an environment that makes fueling look visible, attractive, easy, and satisfying. So if they can't see it, they can't eat it. If it looks gross, then they're not going to eat it. If it seems hard, if it seems hard to eat or hard to get, they're not going to do it. And if it seems unsatisfying, like I eat this and I'm still hungry, or that didn't even taste good, that was horrible. This is not how you form a new fueling habit. So just kind of think around that a little bit. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, but think about how we can help our athletes make these fueling habits visible, attractive, easy, and satisfying. Okay, now I'm going to go into nutrition noise a little bit. Nutrition noise can be a major fueling challenge. It can work against all of the sound nutrition practices that I just talked to you about. And so I want to try to talk through noise and give you a couple talking points in order to help your athletes be kind of just educated consumers of nutrition information. So what is noise? Okay, one thing that is noise is any quick fixes or any magical diets or magical supplements. There is no such thing as magical anything, not without tremendous amount of risk and probably not sustainable, so things that, you think of like your classic weight loss commercials, it's magical. I look like this and then I look like that, like we have really good nutrition research to show that those diets don't work and they don't last and people put the weight back on and it's just not sustainable. So nutrition is not always as exciting or sexy as all of that stuff. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And that habit change stuff that I just talked about is so critical for success. So anything that looks like that is just noise. It's going to distract your athletes. It's going to maybe encourage them to be risky with their nutrition when they should not be risky with their nutrition. So help them identify that as noise. Help remind them that nutrition is a science. Tell them that you saw a presentation with a dietitian who has almost a chemistry degree in order to be a dietitian, and an exercise physiology degree in order to be a sports dietitian. So there's tons of research out there. There's people that are doing research in labs and with human beings in order to determine what the best nutrition interventions are for health and performance. And a lot of that stuff is rooted in adequate carbohydrate, adequate hydration that we talked about, protein timing throughout the day, and just all the things that we talked about. Okay. So another thing that is noise, is 100% noise, is valuing aesthetics over performance or function. Okay. This is going to be incredibly distracting for your athletes if they care more about fitting in a specific pair of jeans than they do about putting power through their legs so that they can be high performing athletes. Or if they're more concerned about, wearing a crop top or a muscle shirt than they are about fueling for, their protein needs, it's going to really inhibit health and performance. It's going to be super distracting for athletes to be, self-conscious about their bodies when they put their uniforms on. And I know that culture change is really hard. I live it, and I'm trying to fight the good fight with all of you. But as much as we can use our language to emphasize performance and function and not aesthetics, that's going to be really helpful in combating some of that noise. Okay. And then the other piece that is noise is just shaming and demonizing, certain foods or certain food groups. You guys have the language and the ability to talk positively about the foods that are going to improve performance and health. I would challenge you to not get super tied up in convincing everybody how terrible a fill in the blank food is, because that's just going to, we know from human behavior, that's going to make people want the food more. That's going to make them think about the food more. That's going to make them want to eat the food in secret and all kinds of things. So if we can just stay away from shaming and demonizing foods and just say, hey, you know, like something that would be more beneficial to your health and performance might be this over here because it has adequate carbohydrates and proteins and all that kind of stuff. And so this is more in line with your goals for, you know, what you're trying to achieve in your sport and in life. So trying to dampen that noise as much as you can. You guys have the power to decide what language is and is not acceptable in your locker rooms and on your courts. And so I would use that position of power, honestly, to create the cultures that are winning cultures and ones that are healthy and performing well. So one thing that I like to do in terms of just encouraging like a healthy culture around food is to encourage our athletes to do just like a weekly self check-in. So telling our athletes like take a time once a week to just kind of check in and think about your mind. You know, how are you concentrating in class? Are you able to learn the plays? Are you able to execute the plays? Are you having trouble with, you know, managing that? You know, how hard do the workouts feel? Do you feel like the workouts feel harder than they used to? You know, maybe as a coach, you're doing that intentionally, but maybe they're feeling like workouts are hard and you're thinking, well, you know, this is actually much easier than a few weeks ago. Increased irritability, you know, irritability with teammates and things like that. Is that showing up? Any digestive issues that might be coming up, any heavy legs during training. Muscle soreness should not be lasting more than 1 to 2 days if our athletes are recovering the way that they should be with protein and antioxidants. If they are sore for a week, they're probably not recovering the way they should, or the training is just so unusual as to what they were maybe doing before. But we should be not normalizing athletes being sore all the time. So encourage your athletes to kind of do a self check. And if they notice things popping up, I would lean on our partners in sports medicine and get some referrals happening, start some conversations around, nutrition, if that's what the issue is, or sports medicine, if that's what the issue is. But the more that we can get athletes in touch with how they're feeling and trusting their own bodies, I feel like the less they're going to be kind of relying on media and other things to kind of tell them, what they need. So finally, I'm going to move into a little section about dietary supplements. So if you all would like to, again, open up the chat and just let me know what dietary supplements are, you seeing amongst your team. And if none, maybe you write none. If there's any popular ones that you're seeing around your locker room, I would love to see those in the chat so that we can kind of use those as our examples. None. We have a none. All right, none. Okay, if there's any of them, feel free to put them in the chat. But this makes your job a whole lot easier. In case any start to pop up, let me give you some resources so that we can talk to our parents or our athletes specifically about any dietary supplements. So I think, first of all, it's important to note that dietary supplements come in so many different forms. It could be pills, it could be powders, it could be gels, it could be drinks, it could be shots, it could be, all kinds of things. So, flip the label over and see if instead of nutrition facts, which indicates it's a food, it says supplement facts. If it says supplement facts, then make sure that you kind of understand that this is being regulated differently. It's not being regulated by the FDA like food. It's being not regulated by the FDA. So the FDA really doesn't look at these things until something unfortunately has gone terribly wrong. So the onus is kind of on the company that they put, on the up and up, like great ingredients, and they don't have any contaminations, and they're checking to make sure they don't have any contaminations, and what's on the label is in the bottle. And, we have really good research to show that at least more than half of the time, what's on the label is not exactly what's in the bottle. So that's super concerning. So that's why we need to be really careful with these dietary supplements. Okay. Also, something to keep in mind that dietary supplements are not often researched in minors. So we don't have a lot of research on, high school football players and creatine or protein powder. We don't have a lot of research on specific types of carbohydrate beverages, that are supplements in our runners or in our endurance athletes or swimmers or things. So, you got to kind of keep that in mind as well. As there's definitely some risk with doing these things before you're 18 years old, because we just don't have a lot of research out there. So I would encourage you and your athletes to kind of go through this decision tree and see, if it makes sense to take a supplement. Am I getting enough of this nutrient through food? So I'm going to go through this for an example. Somebody said multivitamins, hydration tablets. So somebody said multivitamins. So let's just take iron just to keep it real simple. Am I getting enough of this nutrient through food? Some of our athletes are, and some of our athletes are not. So let's say that no, okay, not getting enough iron through food because I'm an endurance athlete and I am, menstruating every month. I'm losing a lot of blood and I'm not getting enough iron. So no. Is there scientific research showing that the supplement enhances health or performance for someone of my age and gender needs? There is for iron. Okay. If somebody is iron deficient, that can be very helpful. Yes. Does it pose a very low risk for health and eligibility concerns? Yes, it does, as long as somebody knows how deficient or insufficient they are in iron and they are supplementing according to the level of deficiency. We should not be just handing all of our endurance athletes iron, because there is iron toxicity risk too. So we can't just go in blind and start giving everyone iron, even though there could be a really good case for that. Okay. Maybe we use another example. Somebody said energy drinks. Okay. Whew. Am I getting enough of this nutrient through food? Well, let's say that they are looking for caffeine. You can get enough caffeine through food, even if you're, a high school athlete. Having a cup of green tea a day is probably, a reasonable thing for them to do, or having a small cup of coffee or things like that, is probably a reasonable thing to do. But the tough part about energy drinks is, that there are many other ingredients in there. And sometimes, the caffeine is stacked. And we have a lot of research showing the increase in emergency room visits in minors because of energy drinks. And you've probably all seen terrible stories in the news about how energy drinks have taken lives of our minors, minor athletes. And so I think that's, the energy drinks, I think something we have to be really careful of. The other thing you mentioned was hydration tablets. Am I getting enough of this nutrient through food? Maybe, because ideally the hydration tablets should be salt. That's what is the primary mineral that we're losing in sweat. So, am I getting enough of it in food? Yes. If you salt your food before your training session, and if you have pretzels as your in-between snack with the salt all over it, if you're consuming, maybe a sports drink after, I don't know. But you might be able to get enough of that electrolytes through food. Actually, milk also has electrolytes in it. So, if you're not, though, kind of go through this decision tree and say, okay, the electrolytes make sense. This person is a really heavy sweater. They're losing a lot of sodium. Let's look for a third-party tested electrolyte supplement. So those third-party symbols are really, really important for sports supplements. It's making sure that these companies go in and test every batch to make sure that what is in the bottle is in the bottle or in the food is on the label and nothing else. So our athletes should not be consuming any sports supplements that do not have one of those two symbols on them. And these third-party testing agencies have websites that you can kind of look at and see which electrolyte supplements are third-party tested. And I would highly recommend making sure that we have a third-party tested electrolyte if that's what makes sense for our athletes. Okay. Awesome. All right. So to kind of wrap it up here, I've kind of left you all with some proactive ideas that you could kind of take from this in order to kind of figure out, 1 to 2 things that you want to try to implement with your teams this year. Okay. Maybe a first step for you is to kind of gather resources, because you kind of, recognize that there is a knowledge barrier, and you want to either be the speaker yourself or maybe bring in a guest speaker. It could be a role model athlete. It could be a healthcare professional who has some expertise around nutrition. Maybe it's a registered, dietitian or sports dietitian, to kind of address some barriers and give your team some knowledge. Okay. Maybe you could provide some education around routines and the habits that support health. One of the handouts that you all are going to be getting is looking at what does a routine look like around fueling for a practice day. And I kind of wrote out like, here's, when a good time would be to eat breakfast and lunch and snacks and pre-fuel and refuel all around the training, to kind of make sure that our timing is correct. Because I remember somebody kind of wanted more information on timing. So that'll be coming your way as well. Make sure that your student athletes are telling sports medicine staff about their dietary supplements, because athletic trainers are well equipped to make sure that these are third-party tested and kind of help give lower risk recommendations. Dietary supplement use and the energy drinks that you mentioned are really high risk. I mean, we're talking like you could save a life by making sure that athletes are being very careful around dietary supplements. So please use your platform and your power in order to make sure that everybody is disclosing their dietary supplements to their sports medicine staff. Call out, maybe a next step for you is to call out nutrition noise that it may jeopardize your team's health and performance, your locker room culture. Start to call that out. It may be uncomfortable at first. You can always come into it, curious, asking athlete why, what did you mean by that? Here's my perspective on how that could really, negatively impact our team culture and our performance this season. I just want to make sure that we're all thinking about that when we're talking to each other that way. And maybe, a next step for you is to think about, what are your team's championship habits? This is something that some of our sport coaches use at Northwestern. And it's kind of nice for establishing kind of some culture on the team of some expectations around, eating breakfast each morning, or maybe you have an expectation around doing some sort of mobility, or maybe you have an expectation around sleep, or maybe, you kind of put these habits together. Maybe the team creates these habits themselves and kind of says, all right, my body is my vehicle. It got me to this point and it's going to get me to the championship. What are the habits that I need to instill in order to help my body get there? So those are just a couple of ideas that I wanted to, leave you all with. I would challenge you again, 1 to 2 things that you can bring back to your team. For some of our teams, we go pretty slow. We work on like pre-fuel for a season, or we work on, refuel for a season. So don't think that you need to get all of these, habits in place in one season. Take it easy on your habit change goals. Here's some additional resources. Midwest Dairy, like I said, is going to be offering you all those those handouts that we created. If you're looking for a registered dietitian because you need somebody to refer your athletes to, I know there was a mention of eating disorders, and you definitely need to make sure that you're not assuming responsibility yourself and like kind of shouldering all of that. I know you're probably not, but please don't. Make sure that you're connecting your athletes with a dietitian and kind of working with your sports medicine staff in order to do that. I inserted a link. You can put in your zip code. And you can also, reach out to me and I can help you get connected with a dietitian as well. The Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association, I know you all aren't collegiate professional, but there's, that's an open resource. So you can go in there and kind of check out some of those webinars. There's some nutrition for injury and rehab handouts from the National Athletic Training Association that you might think are cool as well. So those are the resources that I wanted to leave you with. And then I will pause and see if we have any questions.
Well, thank you, Katie, so much. This was amazing information. I think it was really eye-opening for me. So really appreciate you for doing it. And so at this time, if you want to come off mute, let me know and raise your hand and we can ask questions. And if not, we will be sending out the recording of this information to everybody that registered for the call and all of the handouts in the PowerPoint. But we also will be sending out this to the IHSA network of all coaches. So everybody will have the opportunity to see the webinar and all the information. So thank you so much. And Jeff is saying, and we will be posting it on IHSA's YouTube page. So that will be happening too. So give us a couple days and we'll get everything to you. So I want one more chance to see if anybody has any questions before we go about finishing our lovely Wednesday evening. And thank you guys for joining us. All right, I don't see anybody. Hi.
I had a little friend busting.
I have one over here too, just like ready to get to dance class. Like I'm going to keep her late, so I understand. So we're about to leave, and so thank you guys so much. Have a great evening, and we'll get information out to you soon. And Katie, thank you so much for sharing all this great information with us.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate your, chatting and chatting in the text. And, you have my contact information, so please feel free to reach out if you need anything at all.
All right.
Yeah, Mommy.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.